Is psychiatric diagnostics related to trauma?
Knowing what I know about the contentious nature of this topic, I understand why more people aren't studying it. They just sort of like walked up to the point and then like missed it anyway.
It's a big conversation to have.
Our ADHD is affecting our attachment style, not the other way around.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We are coming in hot with some papers fresh off the press in preprint about attachment styles and ADHD. And we've already been on a little bit of a conversational journey today because I studied attachment style in university, and Sarah didn't. She studied sociology. And so we've been talking about this because it's interesting.
There's a dark side, apparently, to every side of psychology. And so if you would like to look behind that curtain, let's go.
Yeah, well, specifically how it relates to ADHD. And so, you know, basically, I'm going to give you all a little bit of just a summary of the focus of this sort of episode, and then we'll talk a little bit more about these papers in detail. So basically, this episode is about the sort of research that we've been finding that's been coming up about the idea that attachment styles, and we'll talk about what those are for those of you who don't know in a minute, sort of affect ADHD, or maybe they're affected by ADHD. I think that's the other question that is to answer, and sort of might be contributing to them. So that is a little bit controversial for a couple of reasons. And Sarah, do you want to start by just telling us what is attachment theory?
I'm going to explain this as I would have explained it perhaps a half an hour ago. Is that good?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah, because I just had my mind a little bit blown. But okay, so attachment theory essentially is just how you relate and communicate to other people. Obviously, there are sort of healthy ways. They call those secure attachment styles. And then there are a few different insecure attachment styles. And we can sort of talk about the differences between those, but the papers just group them as secure versus insecure. So we're looking at all the sort of subgroups together lumped in later on. So that's cool. So how do we connect with others? And so as we can see, my red flags now are going off because one of the core features of neurodivergence is how we relate to others is affected or is different.
Yeah, different from neurotypicals. So to give you a little bit of a sense of this idea of attachment theory, it's based on Bowlby's styles. And this comes from quite a long time ago when this stuff was designed. And the way that they would do it, and you can sort of see a little picture here coming up when I look this up, is essentially they would, you know, one of the original studies of this was you have a parent, a mum, in this context, coming into a room with a child and spending time with that child, and there was other people around, and then that parent would leave and they would go behind a screen or something like that, and the child would be alone. And so what they were interested in looking at was both how the child responded to the parent leaving. I say the mum, I'm going to say the mum leaving. I keep saying parent because I'm trying to be gender neutral, but this is not a gender neutral study. I just want to put that out there.
It was done in the 70s. It was not gender neutral. It was 100% the mothers.
Yeah. So they had the mum standing behind, and then they would see how, when she came back, how the child responded. And so if it was a secure attachment, the child would usually be upset when the mum left, but then would be easily comforted when the mum came back. If it was disorganized attachment, which is the one that's associated with the most trauma, there was a lot of different things. They could be angry, it could be dismissive, could be like refusal to calm down. And then the other ones were associated with the idea of either like not caring that the mum had left, or caring that the mum had left, but sort of hitting the mum. You know, this is a baby, so sort of like refusing to be calmed when the mum came back. And these were all signs, according to Bowlby's theory, of insecure attachment. And this became a huge, huge part of psychology. Such a huge part of what we do today is about going, okay, your parents essentially created insecure attachment styles, which you then took with you into the world, and you were avoidantly attached or insecurely attached and very anxious with people, and you didn't trust people and things like that. And in some cases, people would say, well, if you become older and you have an intimate partner, that partner can affect your attachment style. So if they're secure, you can become securely attached as well. Or if you're insecure, if you were securely attached and you had a partner who is, in some cases, not a good relationship to be in, you can become insecurely attached. So that's a little bit of the background of this research that I told Sarah half an hour ago.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm just going to say they have developed now an attachment style questionnaire. So they are no longer sort of subjecting human children to any type of, studies to get this research.
That we know of. I'm pretty sure they probably do somewhere, but yeah.
Yeah, I made a white bunny joke off the air.
Yeah. Yeah, so they have a questionnaire for adults now, which is great.
Actually, I think it's for both.
Oh, is it? Oh, right.
I think there's one for both in the meta-analysis. But anyway, so I'm really glad that I went looking for this meta-analysis. Anyway, we should probably go backwards a little bit because we never did our full introduction of the papers.
Yeah, let's go back in time to when we were younger and more relaxed a week ago, just looking at our first paper on ADHD attachment styles. Take us through, I guess I'll take you through what it was, and then you take us through what they found. So this was a paper from the Journal of Borderline Personality Disorder and Emotional Regulation. And essentially what they were looking at was they were looking at a cross-diagnostic cluster analysis of attachment styles in patients with emotional dysregulation. And they incorporated the idea of ADHD in that emotional dysregulation. What they wanted to know was, does having a psychiatric diagnosis correlate with attachment style and with childhood trauma? So how did they do this study, Sarah?
Basically, they were doing a cluster analysis, which is taking your participants and sorting them into group based on their similarities. Their sample size in the end was 150 outpatient patients from a psychiatric clinic in Sweden over the span of 2008 to 2011. Now, I will say that when they first started out, their sample was significantly larger. What was that figure?
It was crazy how many more people
like
they
600,
were. I feel like I've seen a lot of longitudinal studies, and there is a drop-off, but I don't remember there being a drop-off that big. So I was really interested in that.
Yeah, it was 609 they started with, and they wound up with 150. They did notice some similarities amongst the people who did drop out, so much so that they put an entire section in their paper about this.
They had to. I doubt they would have published otherwise.
All in all, the people who dropped out tended to be younger and individuals with ADHD.
Yeah, and women, and as well.
There were more women in this study. Yeah, so I guess less men. Which I mean, interesting. Oh, also, all psychiatric diagnoses were confirmed with clinical interviews using the DSM. They used questionnaires for attachment style. They also completed other scales for like temperament, which is like, your mood, and trauma. Because again, they were looking for that childhood trauma link. Anyway, and then they just ran some like statistics.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to get a sense of what was going on. So basically what they were looking for was, is psychiatric diagnostics related to trauma? And what they found was that when it came to ADHD, not really.
Yeah.
So Sarah, do you want to take us a little bit into what I mean by that? What do they find specifically?
They ended up clustering these people based on their attachment style for obvious reasons. And I mean, across the board, obviously, they found less individuals with ADHD in all of the groups. And they talk about this sort of as a limitation because really all their findings were on ADHD comorbid bipolar.
Yeah.
Which is not the same as an ADHD specific finding. Anyway, but, they did see that those diagnosed with ADHD and comorbid bipolar were more having the insecure avoidant type.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say when they they did just people with ADHD. You know, we were talking about like 11 people were classified as insecure avoidant. One person was classified as avoidant anxious, and 8 people were classified as secure. So we're talking about such a small sample. Yeah.
Hi, Sky here, just popping in with a quick strategy for you. As some of you might know, we've recently launched the Goals Achieved with ADHD Academy, and some of our members kindly agreed to have their sessions recorded so that I could share them with you. So what you're about to hear is a snippet of a strategy that Amani and I worked on to help her with her goal of getting a job. So hopefully you'll find this strategy helpful, and if you'd like to talk with me about how you can achieve your goals with ADHD, just click the description below to book a free 15-minute focus session and we'll get started together.
How do we beat that procrastination, rejection sensitivity cycle around this incredibly complicated, incredibly rejection sensitive thing?
Applying for a job brings up so much in me. I'm giving myself these deadlines, which are my kryptonite. If I were anybody else, I would be like, it is not a big deal. What matters is that you get them out.
There's different parts of applications in general. Some of them are rejection sensitive, some of them aren't. We need to divide tasks into things that are stressful and things that are not stressful. Do the more relaxed bits, and then we're going to get a bunch of dopamine and chunk together all of the stressful bits and do those together. We want to separate the writing the application self and the sending the application self. How do you feel about the strategy? Are you happy with that as a thing to try?
Yes. Very, very excited about it. That sounds great.
So I think really the important thing left to say here is that they found no difference between the attachment style clusters in terms of frequency of childhood trauma. So they found no correlations between attachment style and childhood trauma amongst this sample of 150 people.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Like that.
Yeah.
I was like, great, let me learn about attachment style. I'm going to go find a meta-analysis.
Yeah. And so at that point, we were thinking, cool, that's awesome. This episode is going to be about how attachment style, we can't find anything. Obviously, this paper is not a great paper, quite frankly, in terms of the amount of people lost and the amount of people specifically with ADHD. But it's interesting. People are looking at attachment style and ADHD.
It's also in preprint.
It's also in preprint. Yeah. So let's find another paper, as we usually do, to go ahead and back up this paper and have a conversation. And so that's what Sarah went off to do. And we did find another paper.
You know what? It actually makes sense now why it was so difficult to find a paper. Yeah, this was the only one I found. So yeah, do your little introduction thing. I'm ready.
Well, no, sorry. Why was it so difficult to find? Why does it make sense?
So generally speaking, I can find like at least one open access paper on a topic that I'm looking for. The paper we're about to talk about was the only paper I was able to find on the topic, period.
Yeah.
And it was not open access. I had to wait for
our research team to
to get back to me. I was like, anyway, it's very, very nice, lengthy paper. But now, knowing what I know about the contentious nature of this topic, I understand why more people aren't studying it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so this second paper is also about attachment style. This is a meta-analysis that was published in 2023. So again, pretty relatively new. It's from the European Journal of Developmental Psychology. And what they were looking at is the role of attachment styles in ADHD, a meta-analytic review from the perspective of a transactional development model, which is, to kind of summarize it, it's basically a model that they are making. They're making a conceptual framework, which means this is a very new model. I don't think it had been tested. This was to sort of start the concept of this model in its entirety at all. So the purpose of this was to present a meta-analytic review on the relationship between attachment styles and ADHD symptoms among children and adolescents, summarizing the findings of 26 studies. So Sarah, take us through sort of how they did this meta-analysis. Because the meta-analysis, I will say, and we always say this, is one of the better ways of doing research.
Yeah, so I'll definitely talk about the meta-analysis. This paper is really interesting because we're gonna talk about it in a couple of different ways. I'll talk about the meta-analysis. I really like the introduction to this paper. It's sort of why I wanted to dig into this whole topic in the first place, is because I wanted to learn about why attachment theory. We're gonna have to do a little bit of terms defining as well as we go through.
Yeah. So hang in there, guys. We're going to make it fun.
Yeah. That was supposed to be a concise summary of what we're going to talk about.
I swear it'll be good.
Good thing it's interesting. Yeah. So this is just a standard meta-analysis. They only were looking at peer-reviewed papers, scientific published articles. Like, they started their search in 1971 because that's when the first reliable assessment tool for attachment styles was designed. And then they were collecting data through October 2021. All the subjects are sort of in the child adolescent stage, so 1 to 19. They all the studies must have evaluated ADHD using valid and reliable assessment instruments. So I think that means clinical assessment, DSM, that sort of thing. And then they were also looking for the various attachment types, and then children and adolescents. So just all in all, standard meta-analysis, really focused on lasering in on this.
Yeah, I can tell you're grumpy, Sarah, because you were like so excited about this paper. It was a really good meta-analysis.
It is great. That's not even the interesting part, right?
Exactly.
The reason I got excited to talk about this is because the introduction to this paper talks about how there are many different theories as to why people might present with such wide ADHD symptoms. Why is my ADHD so much different from Sky's ADHD? And so there are lots of different theories that are speculating, right? So some of the earliest ones, executive functioning difficulties. Cool. There's emotional dysregulation is part of that. And so attachment theory also is throwing its name in the ring as a mediating factor. And so I took that to mean that our ADHD is affecting our attachment style, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So if I'm wrong, that seems silly.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, I think this was why we sort of had to go back to this paper and look it up, because it really is, which one is affecting which one. And we'll get into it. But essentially, the way that they did this was, it was 26 studies over 3,000 individuals. And, I guess what we'll say is that they did find there was some relationship, according to this meta-analysis, there was some relationship between insecure negative attachment styles, so all of the ones that aren't secure attachment styles, and ADHD. So if you were ADHD across the board, according to this paper, you were less likely to be securely attached. You were more likely to be attached in all of these different insecure ways, dismissive, ambivalent, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So at the end of their introduction, they say that they've identified some gaps in the literature that they're hoping to resolve at some point. So what does it look like? What is the interrelationship? Does different subtype play a part here? So they looked at subtype.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason that this is a tricky topic to discuss is because it's a very short jump, a very short walk between there is a relationship between attachment styles and ADHD, and parents are responsible for some portion of their child's ADHD. ADHD is associated with trauma, which is something that we've seen come up a lot in, in recent time. And so that is an interesting conversation to have. I'm not saying that's what this paper was saying, but we always talk about the idea that a paper can be taken in multiple different ways, especially because this paper did not clearly not say that as far as we could tell. So it brings into, for example, if you guys have seen, Gabor Mate and people like that talking about ADHD and trauma, there's a lot of controversy around that idea. I would consider myself not securely attached, at least not from a childhood perspective. I don't think that relates to my ADHD. I think they've got a long line of ADHD people in my family that would indicate that that's not the case. But, there is a conversation about this idea that everything is the result of trauma. And so that it's a big conversation to have. And it's not really discussed here at all. They're just kind of finding the stuff. That's really interesting. Here's a conceptual framework and, sort of leaving it at that.
As a matter of fact, they didn't even define each individual attachment style in the paper that I could find. Maybe it had already been cut or whatever. But yeah, so their conceptual framework is not doing anything to challenge the existing attachment styles. I think we would all benefit from some conceptualization. So let's start talking some terms, because the transactional model is actually really cool. I got really excited about it because it basically is based on the whole idea that any process that happens to you is going to affect you in the long run, and also you are going to affect it in the long run. Sort of this interplay between you and your environment over time. Obviously, that can impact development, right? Like that just sort of makes sense to me. So I thought that made so much sense here in the attachment theory framework.
Yeah. Basically, what they said was a transactional model of development could be a promising conceptual framework for understanding the way clinical expressions of ADHD and attachment patterns influence each other. They have a little picture, for those of you who want to find this paper, it's on page 441, where they sort of say like, okay, so maybe parents' emotional difficulties impact child temperament, and then maybe the child's temperament is impacting maladaptive parenting strategies, and maybe self-regulation on the child's part is affecting parenting styles, and then ADHD symptoms is also impacting those. So they're sort of saying like maybe all of these different areas, emotional difficulties, temperament, parenting styles, parents' emotions, maybe they're all sort of ping-ponging and impacting each other. And that is all part of this idea of the ADHD clinical diagnosis. But it's a tricky conversation to have. It's a much trickier conversation to have than they really acknowledge, I think, in this paper.
Now we're getting to the conversation that we were already having. So I'm just going to seamlessly go right into that, because I just don't think that the whole attachment theory framework really gels with the neurodiversity paradigm as we understand it, right? So follow me on this, okay? So neurodiversity inherently means that your brain develops differently, sort of right from the, as far as we know, very beginning. If attachment style is a product of your environment, your neurobiology would have already taken some measurable hits as a result of ADHD or autism, or bipolar is also a part of neurodiversity. And so isn't it the other way around? Isn't it actually the ADHD or the autism impacting how you attach yourself to others, how you relate, how you communicate, how you, attach to others, right? Autism, the hallmark is that there are measurable, observable differences in how they relate to others. It's how we diagnose kids for the most part. We notice something is different.
Yeah, and it is a very interesting question as well, because it sort of leads to the question of going, okay, this attachment style theory is based on the idea that if you have kids in a room and their parent leaves and their parent comes back, they're going to react in certain ways. But ADHD kids, ADHD people, we don't react normally, generally speaking. I mean, that's the whole point. So,
I think we should say predictably, because really what disorganized attachment style is not responding consistently.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
To the same thing. So that's not even the one that I personally resonated with, just by the way.
Yeah. What did you resonate with? I'd love to know.
So I personally find the ambivalent preoccupied attachment to be much more like my long-term style. You know, I've probably been through periods of any number of these, but the other one, so the ambivalent preoccupied style is more characterized by like strong desire for closeness with another, but also like anxiety and uncertainty about like, is this for real? Like, do you hate me? I noticed that you messaged me like 30 minutes later than usual.
It is an interesting one, you know, because it does come, I mean, you know, there's many different reasons for that, but one of the reasons could be, and I'm not saying it is because I'm not a researcher and like I'm taking this, I think this is a really important area of research to do properly. One of the reasons could be because you forget how time works. You know, if you're like, oh, you're 30 minutes late and you're not usually, and I have a schedule because that's how if you come and call me in 2 hours, I'm going to be busy. Yeah. So that could be one of the reasons. I'm not in any way trying to say that is the reason. But it's an interesting conversation if we are different.
The desire for closeness could be seen as the desire for co-regulation.
Or just the fact that people with ADHD struggle to have relationships because it's hard to connect with people who are neurotypical. And so therefore, I mean, we do know that in the research, it's harder for us to communicate with people who are neurotypical. So maybe if we find people who are neurodiverse, we have a much stronger desire for closeness because there's less of them and it's harder to find. That could be a factor as well.
Also, we can't ignore the sensory processing aspect of all of this. We know that some of us experience physical and emotional stimuli different as a result of our neurodiversity. And so that comes into play here as well. If I feel something so strongly that it like hurts, I might maybe want to avoid that relationship.
I
might be a little bit dismissive of that person. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to feel that way. This is an interesting conversation that I wasn't expecting to have.
100%. Yeah. But that's what we love doing here. We
Beautiful.
love diving into the research. We're sort of, you know, swan diving into, well, not exactly, sort of belly flopping into the research and kind of like having these conversations. And I will say there is sometimes there's a bit of anxiety about having these conversations in public because I think they're quite important. And I think that they are very important to have. But I think it's good to flag because this is the second paper on this that's come out in the last year, combined with this conversation about ADHD being related to trauma. It is interesting to see whether this conversation about ADHD being related to emotional dysregulation, which is a great conversation. And we're like, yes, please talk more about how emotional dysregulation is a part of the diagnostic framework of ADHD, then becomes, well, ADHD is a trauma factor and not a genetic factor, or, you know, that conversation. And I think that's an interesting, you know, I'm sort of just pulling pattern recognizing as we do here and sort of noticing things that are happening and wondering where this is going, I suppose.
Yeah. I would really hate for ADHD to go that way, you know?
Same.
The whole
very
field.
much same. Yeah. I think we can talk about genetics and we can talk about emotional, you know, we talk about we can have trauma and have ADHD. It's, you know.
Oh my gosh, here we are again though, nature versus nurture, right? It's both.
Yeah.
It's not the thing, but it's a thing.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that like, you know, I definitely think that there is a world in which, you know, I don't associate, especially growing up with secure attachment. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for that. That's between me and my therapist to figure that out. But it's not necessarily the reason that I have ADHD.
No, I definitely don't resonate with that. Like, I don't think that my ADHD is as a result of my attachment. I don't know. And that's what they're saying.
Well, they're sort of saying, so I'm going to read out exactly what they said because I want to make sure we get this right because we're not necessarily negative about this paper. I think it's more just what this paper showcases and might be speaking to. It could be possible to conclude that insecure attachment might play a role in reinforcing difficulties with self-regulation of behaviors and attention characterizing children and adolescents with ADHD. So what they're saying is that maybe being insecurely attached is reinforcing ADHD symptoms and making them worse potentially, which is an interesting conversation. I mean,
I still think the other way around. Maybe this is just the neurodiverse thing again.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but it's probably still the other way around. Like, how we relate to other people is going to cause difficulties and additional distractions in our lives. So if we're not able to relate, like communicate, socialize with other people in a healthy way consistently, that's going to add stress to our lives. And so make our ADHD symptoms worse.
And there is an interesting point that they make on page 452 that I think might back you up there a little bit, although they don't talk about it in that way. They do say that, each domain of ADHD psychopathology, we love that word for us, was consistently associated with specific patterns of insecure attachment. So, for example, dismissive and disorganized attachment style was positively correlated with inattentive, and then ambivalent and preoccupied attachment style was related to hyperactive. And so they're sort of putting those two pieces together.
It's almost like way back when they started this attachment theory, they were looking at a bunch of kids, some of which were neurodivergent, and they created a whole theory about it. And they just sort of like walked up to the point and then like missed it anyway.
Yeah, I'm sensing a desire to go and study psychology.
No, I don't have time for that. I have 2 kids
that I have to raise securely, clearly.
Yeah, and also that I have to like figure out how to navigate this whole system for them, because it's not easy. They don't help you through it necessarily. So I'm going to have to be the one to help them through it, right? Like I'm the one that has to teach them that they can lift up the cover on their stove to like clean under where the grates are, right? Like I'm going to teach them that. Just like I'm going to find all their helpful doctors, I'm not going to go study psychology, but I am going to help inspire other people to maybe study some of the stuff, because I think they're wrong. It's just backwards.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, I think there's a lot of different ways of thinking about this. And I will say at the beginning of this paper, they reference, let me find it. I've literally got this up on my Remarkable because this was such an in-depth study and I wanted to make sure we were saying everything right. But, they reference Barkley proposing a comprehensive evidence-based model that posits widespread alterations in the self-regulation system as the core feature of ADHD, which is good. That makes sense. And we like that, it makes sense with us and our experiences. But it's very far away from what they talk about at the end of the paper. This idea that ADHD is, a self-regulation idea, and then the idea that maybe attachment style could be contributing to that self-regulation. Or, they sort of do mention the idea that maybe having an ADHD kid means that parents act in ways that contributes to that kid being insecurely attached, which I think is another weird thing to say. It's the idea that maybe the child is contributing to their parents, treating them in a way that means that they're insecurely attached.
They really had me in the first half, okay? Like they literally they literally say any process that happens to an individual is going to have like an interplay relationship with everything else that happens to that individual. And like, yes, I buy into that.
We love that. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean like we're not talking causation, I think. And so, maybe I should just flag that super like huge when we publish this, because we're definitely not talking causation. I think the thing I was really excited to talk about is the confounding factor, because they do play off of each other. And that can be a really unique way to like help you relate to people in a more healthy way, like help you have healthier, more fulfilling relationships by like understanding why you relate to people in a certain way, or like how you could do it in a different way, right? Like attachment theory is all just like, okay, go to therapy about it.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, and I will say if you can do there's different ways to look up, I would say take a minute, look up attachment theory, have a look at whether you're securely attached or insecurely attached and what that might mean for you and how you relate to others. But don't feel like that is responsible for your, it's just another piece of the puzzle. It's not necessarily the reason you have ADHD. At least I don't think so. I think it's important to kind of say that because there's a lot of guilt, I think, attached to attachment theory, ironically. And it's worth, I don't know, giving this one a bit of more empathetic touch when we're having these conversations and keeping in mind the people's experiences. And if you're not securely attached, well, just know, yep, neither. Join the group.
Same.
You can join us.
It's fine. I've been working on it for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Yeah, and it's definitely...
And I didn't have the language for it, right? And so that's what this was about, right? I just wanted to give people the language to explain something that they're already possibly going through and just maybe can't communicate, because that's when we start having like behaviors that are unhelpful, is when people can't communicate with each other. So that's...
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like,
here you go. I hope you enjoyed this.
Take something from that. Yeah. Have a look at attachment style. Have a look at what it relates to, and, maybe there's some correlations there and there'll be more research into them. But I think moving into the ADHD as trauma kind of conversation is definitely not what we want to do. And this paper, whether it knows it or not, feels a little bit hop, step, and a jump kind of from that conversation. So I think it's important to just flag that, and we'll keep looking, we'll keep seeing what's coming up in the research, and we'll keep bringing it to you and making sure you guys stay informed, because that's what we love to do. Awesome. Do you have anything else to say, Sarah?
No, that was good. I got it all out.
You're feeling better. At some point, Sarah was just like, we have to start recording now. I have to hit record. We have to talk about this. Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's everything. We'll see you in 2 weeks with another research recap. See you then. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out or connect with us, you can leave us a message at admin@unconventionalorganization.com.
You can also find out more about our ADHD coaching organization, read our free articles, or sign up to our online courses at unconventionalorganization.com. That's organization with a Z or an S. They both will get you there.
If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed here today, or you want to read the transcript, you can find that at our show notes page at unconventionalorganization.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and think someone else might find the strategies and stories helpful, the best thing you can do is share episodes using the share button in the podcast player, or leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or your podcast player of choice, letting them know why you've benefited from this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back in the ADHD lab next week.